And now the royal party is passing by in the governing flag. For the last time, the Rhodesia national anthem has been played over Rhodesia.
Class?
Good morning, Miss Mutonga.
How are you?
We are fine, thank you. And how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. We have a visitor this morning. He's Mr. Stanley. He may be familiar to some of us because often he's on television. He's here to share with us very important information that affects our lives. Mr. Stanley, you are welcome. A big hand for Mr. Stanley.
Thank you. Good morning, good people.
Good morning, Mr. Stanley.
How many of you have turned 16? That's a lot of you. That's good. Now, did you know that when you turn 16, you can apply for your national registration card?
Yes.
And with your national registration card, upon turning 18, you can register as a voter. Did you know?
Yes.
That's the power in your hands. The power to really shape the things that you should worry about. What are the issues that really concern you as young people? Yes.
The issue of load shedding.
Good governance. A people's constitution, our constitution.
Freedom of expression.
The cost of living. Sanitation.
Good roads.
Now, you may not believe it, but you, the youth of this country, have power in your hands to make a difference. Do you see now why it's important to register as a voter as soon as you are 18?
Yes.
You can make a difference, just as our forefathers did way back before we got our independence. Imagine for one moment. The year is 1880. There is no country known as Zambia and her neighboring countries. This is because in 1880, Zambia was simply part of an endless mass of land that made up the present-day continent of Africa, but without any boundaries. Africa then was under leadership of tribal chiefs, kingdoms of very strong warriors that provided natural traditional leaders. About 150 years ago, the continent of Africa was visited by explorers from Europe and some slave traders from America. To the slave traders, Africa provided slaves, while to the explorers, Africa provided raw materials for their kings and leaders. The slaves were taken to work in the factories and plantations. At this time, Europe was undergoing a great industrialization process, and a lot of raw materials and precious minerals were in high demand. Africa provided the raw material. Information sent back to their home countries by explorers and some missionaries interested the kings and emperors in Europe. Before long, a conference known as the Berlin Conference was held in Berlin, Germany, from 1884 until early 1885, by various European countries, to find a way of sharing or partitioning the continent of Africa. It was an all-white affair. The entry into northern Rhodesia by the British came from South Africa by one millionaire called Cecil John Rhodes. Cecil John Rhodes wanted the highlands of Central and Eastern Africa under the British rule. His real interest, though, was personal. It was to expand his mining operations of gold deposits between Limpopo and Zambezi rivers and northwards to the copper deposits of Katanga in the present-day Democratic Republic of Congo. The British colonial government introduced indirect rule in northern Rhodesia. This was done through local traditional chiefs, some of whom were imposed on the people. The British also introduced various forms of taxes, such as the poll tax and hard tax. Those without money to pay for the taxes were forced to work in order for them to make the money to pay the taxes. The taxes and treatment created resentment and discontent among Africans. The working conditions among Africans working for the white settler community were poor. The wages were low. Africans were not allowed to vote. Even if they were the majority, Africans had no say in the running of northern Rhodesia. Just shortly after the Second World War and the strikes on the Copperbelt mines, a great and vibrant nationalist movement emerged in northern Rhodesia. First came the Federation of African Societies of Northern Rhodesia under Mr. Dautiamba. These organized nationalist movements were modeled after the Mwenzo Welfare Association of Northern Province that had started in 1912 by Reverend Donald Swale. In 1948, the Northern Rhodesian African Congress was formed by Mr. Godwin Bikusita Lewanika. In the Northern Rhodesia Constitution of 1958, a handful of Africans could vote. However, in order to qualify to vote, you needed to earn a certain amount of salary per year. You needed to own property and to have attained a certain level of education. For many Africans, these conditions were untenable. This meant that the majority of Africans were simply excluded from the voting process. The formation of the Northern Rhodesian African Congress raised the tempo of political consciousness or awareness among the Africans. More trade unions were formed, and internally, the Northern Rhodesian colonial government was under considerable pressure to respond to the aspirations of Africans. Later, the African National Congress under Mr. Harry Mwangankumbula led the fight against the imposition of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. In 1959, the militant African National Congress experienced a major split in its ranks. The breakaway party formed the short-lived Zambia African National Congress, ZANC. The Zambia African National Congress was banned on 20th March 1959 by the British colonial authorities. ZANC, however, resurfaced under a new name as the United National Independence Party, UNIP, in September of the same year, led temporarily by Mayenza Chona because Kaunda was in prison. The first Republican president, Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda, assumed the leadership of UNIP upon his release from prison in 1960. Both the ANC and UNIP were agitating against the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland and for the right of Africans to have the vote. UNIP led a civil disobedience campaign which was called Cha-Cha-Cha. This consisted largely of arson and obstructing significant roads. Eventually, the British colonial government succumbed to pressure, mostly from UNIP and the ANC. The Lancaster House Conference, held in January 1961, paved way for general elections, firstly in 1962 and more prominently in January 1964. The Lancaster House Conference was followed by the Northern Rhodesian Independence Conference, which was held at Marlborough House in London in May of 1964. All political parties represented in the Northern Rhodesia Legislative Council at the time attended the conference. the British Union Jack flag was lowered and the new Zambia national flag was hoisted to signify Zambia's attainment of political independence.
I will dedicate my abilities to the service and welfare of the people of Zambia without fear or favor, affection or ill will. So help me God.
A free and independent Zambia was born. It is very important to know that the struggle for Zambia's political independence was not an easy one at all. It came about as a result of a lot of careful planning, campaigning, and vigorous fighting against many injustices from the British colonial rulers by a very committed team of African nationalists. These are the people now commonly known as freedom fighters. In an effort to stem what was considered inter-party rivalry, tribalism and violence that resulted in deaths of citizens, and promote economic development, Dr. Kaunda's UNIP government amended the constitution and introduced a one-party state at the beginning of 1973. UNIP became the only political party in the country. This was the start of the Second Republic.
One Zambia,
One nation,
one nation,
one leader,
one nation,
one leader.
and that leader.
Dr. Kaunda, vote yes.
During the Second Republic, 4 presidential and general elections were held in December 1973, 1978, 1983, and 1988. Because this was a one-party state, there was only one candidate who stood for election, Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda. Citizens could only vote yes or no against the candidature of Dr. Kenneth Kaunda. Governance under the one-party state in many instances proved a wrong direction to take. The one-party state proved incapable of addressing Zambia's increasing economic problems. The one-party state was not democratic enough, and eventually Zambians became increasingly disgruntled and protested against the system. The failed military coup attempts in 1980 and 1990 are a case in point. There were food riots following price increases of meal and the scarcity of essential commodities between 1986 and 1990.
Can you lose?
These events of discontent among citizens became a rallying point for bringing together supporters or promoters for the reintroduction of multi-party democracy, convened by Akashambatwa Mbikusta Lewonika and Derek Mbita Chitala. A meeting of such supporters was held at Garden House Hotel, west of Lusaka in July 1990. This was the beginning of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, MMD. At another level, the events forced the then Republican President, Dr. Kaunda, to quickly review the governance of the country under the one-party state. The UNIP government subsequently agreed to repeal Article 4 of the Constitution by Parliament. Article 4 had previously prohibited any political party other than UNIP to exist. With the repeal, Zambia became a multi-party state once more. This signaled the beginning of the Third Republic.
I'm glad, therefore, to take this opportunity to say now, those who want to form their small parties are most welcome, provided they know that we want peace in Zambia, peace, stability, unity, and development. This fellow is signing on behalf of 8.5 million Zambians. Date of assent is 17th December 1990.
The fight for genuine democracy has reached a critical stage now in this country.
The reintroduction of multi-party politics saw the emergency of the movement for multi-party democracy as a political party. When multi-party presidential and parliamentary elections were held on the 31st October 1991, the MMD won a landslide victory of more than 120 seats out of 150 parliamentary seats contested for at the time. Since coming to power in November 1991, the MMD government under Dr. Frederick Chiluba as the new Republican president in 1993 appointed a Constitutional Review Commission led by Mr. John Monakatwe. The new constitution enabled a candidate to become a Republican president upon mustering a simple majority of votes, as opposed to the previous constitution that stipulated 51% majority votes. More significantly, however, the new constitution provided that a person could serve as Republican president for a maximum of 2 5-year consecutive terms. Nevertheless, the separation of powers in the three arms of the state, namely the executive, the judiciary and the legislature, are constantly being enhanced. One of the results under the Parliamentary Reforms Program initiated in 2001 was the opening up of constituency parliamentary offices in every constituency in Zambia. This has been done to ensure that Parliament is close to the electorate and interaction between the people and their respective member of Parliament is improved. Democracy in Zambia has been greatly enhanced by the country's strict observance of holding regular presidential and parliamentary elections once every 5 years. Elections are one golden opportunity given to citizens to choose political and civic leaders. By first registering as voters and secondly by casting their votes, citizens have power in their hands through the ballot paper to elect people as councillors to represent them in district councils or members of parliament to represent them in the National Assembly. Citizens also elect a person to the position of Republican president. Holding elections in any country demands a lot of planning, organization and resources. In Zambia, the Electoral Commission of Zambia ECZ was established in 1996 by the Republican Constitution as an autonomous body. The Commission is responsible for functions such as supervising the registration of voters, conducting presidential, parliamentary and local government elections, reviewing the boundaries of the constituencies. You might ask, what is a constituency? Well, constituencies are geographical areas into which Zambia is divided for the purposes of allocating parliamentary seats. The Electoral Commission of Zambia is also responsible for providing electoral information and voter education to members of the public, establishing alternative dispute mechanisms for the management of electoral disputes, conducting the continuous review and update of electoral laws, and, if determined by the President, conducting referenda. The Commission conducted national elections in 1996, 2001, 2006 and 2011. The Commission also conducted the presidential elections in 2008. The functions of the ECZ entails that the Electoral Commission of Zambia not only performs, but is seen to perform in a fair, transparent, independent, credible and objective manner. The ECZ strives to ensure that as many eligible voters as possible are registered, and equally, as many of these registered voters cast their votes when an election is held. This is important in any democracy. The gap between the number of people on the voters' register and the number that actually turns out to vote is showing a worrying trend. Many Zambian citizens, even when registered as voters, simply stay away from actually voting. In so doing, they are not having their say in choosing who is elected to govern them. Take a look at this sample pie chart. In 1964, over 800,000 voters were registered to vote. Over 800,000 actually cast their vote. This was impressive. In 1991, there were almost 4 million eligible voters. Of these, almost 3 million registered as voters. Unfortunately, only over 1 million actually voted. In 2008, the trend is worse. Of almost 4 million registered voters, only 1.7 million voted. There is a need to increase voter turnout by ensuring that all eligible citizens register and that all registered voters cast their votes when election time comes. By so voting, people will be exercising fully their democratic right and, more importantly, productively use the voting right for which freedom fighters shed their blood and died for. More Zambians, especially young people, should truly exercise their right to choose and in the process to have their views and voices heard. This in turn could bring about change in national policy decisions, in the quality of parliamentary debates, and possibly in the laws that are passed. This is the power citizens have in their hands. This is the power in your hands. So you see, the right to vote did not come easy, but when it did come, it made a whole lot of a difference, because now we can all shape our destiny through the process of voting. That's the power in your hands.
Shall we give Mr. Stanley another big hand?
It is your right. It is your vote.
But you know, every time it's election time, I see mom and dad looking up for the NRCs and the voters card, eager to go and vote.
Exactly. Like, I just can't wait for my vote to count for something.
It's young breed, you know.
Not why I said go and get you on money.
Take a stand to register. La 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 la. ECZ, endorsing your choice.
For the sake of the children and a better tomorrow, it's time to lift up our voices and speak as one.
Show your love, loyalty, support for Mother Zambia by voting in peace and unity. Do not buy or sell voters' cards.
Hey guys, look, I have power in my hand.
We all have power in our hands.
Zambia, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Zambia, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.